In eConfig Cloud, when you want to save a configuration information, you can either export that to a file using the export action, or you can save it to the configuration repository, which is a function like box or Dropbox. Those actions to save the configuration are outlined here on the page, and there's two of them. There's a save action and save as action to save your configuration information. I wanted to explain the differences between those two so that it's clear what's happening when you pick one versus the other. So let's start with a save. I have my configuration session I started, and when I started this configuration session, I called it my config1. And I've created a configuration. I have some configuration information now that I want to save. So I'm going to select the save action, and when I do that, it's going to save that configuration data into the configuration repository with the name myconfig1, the same thing that you used when you created your configuration. Now, if I go on and I make some other changes, I decide I want to make some other things or update some other things, it is still myconfig1 in the session name, and I have this changed information. If I hit save again, I'm going to write that configuration information and replace the information in the repository with my revised configuration data here under myconfig1. So I would still only see one configuration in the configuration repository, but it would have the data from those latest changes that I did. Contrast that with a save as scenario. So now let's say I go start another session and I create that session called myconfig2. I can't call it myconfig1 because that one is already used. So I call that myconfig2. I create my configuration information. In the same way, I hit the save action. And because that's my configuration session name, that's what it's going to save as in the repository. Now I'm going to make some more changes in my configuration, but instead of saving this as a save, I select the save as action. And when I do that, I'm going to get prompted to call this and I'm going to call it myconfig3. So when the save occurs, now that's going to be written to the configuration repository as a new separate configuration file. And I'm going to have it out there as myconfig2 and then myconfig3. And the configuration session name is going to change to myconfig3. So now if I move forward and I make more changes on that configuration, and I hit save action again, instead of save as, I hit save here again, well, that's going to still get written to myconfig3. It's going to replace the information from that previous save as with new information in your latest changes under myconfig3. Well, of course, in the same way, in my other session, if I made changes there and then I selected save as, I'm going to pick a name myconfig4 now, 1, 2, and 3 used, and that will save it to the repository. And the configuration session name would change to myconfig4. Hopefully this helps clarify what happens and the differences between a save and a save as.